Good afternoon, dear members and others who have taken time to tune into our webinar. It's a great pleasure for me to have Vladimír Dlouhý as our guest. Dear Vladimír, these are turbulent times in the world and in the Czech Republic, and I guess we can say you're in the eye of the storm. The Czech Chamber of Commerce is fighting on many fronts, and you must be a busy man right now. In that view, we are very grateful that you've taken time to talk to us today. So welcome, Vladimír. How are you today?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure as always to have a chat with Nordic Chamber. I'm on my home office. On my right-hand side, you can see God knows how many textbooks in macroeconomics and economic history. On my left-hand side, you see the cooling box for my wines, which did not fit into the kitchen, so I put it in my study. And I'm at your disposal. I can tell you a few words, how do I see the economic situations now, or because Niels, you sent over a couple of questions, as a matter of fact, many questions, we can go directly to the question, because I could, of course, give you some very basic introduction. How do I see economic growth last year, this year? How do I see unemployment, inflation, etc.? But these are all numbers which are very unsecure, just because we are living in the pandemics. So you tell me how you would like to proceed.
Well, I thought there are quite a few foreigners, so I thought I might introduce you quickly to our listeners or viewers, and I just want them to understand what the Czech Chamber does, because some of our viewers or members are of the opinion that you represent the government, which is not the case. So let me do that, and then we go over to the questions. I don't think you need very much of an introduction, but I can pick a couple of accolades from your rich CV. You were the first Minister of Economy, followed by 6 years, I believe, as a Minister of Trade and Industry. You have even candidated for president. You've been advisor to a number of blue chip companies, among them Goldman Sachs, ABB, Rolls-Royce. You've had leading functions at the IMF, and you were head of the economic think tank NERV, and the list continues. Anyway, since 2014, you've been leading the Chamber of Commerce, which is the Employers Association for 16,000 entrepreneurs and SMEs. And you obviously represent us business owners in our struggles in negotiations with trade unions, governments, and other stakeholders. And I would, again, to our listeners, like to emphasize that Mr. Dlouhý does not represent the government, but the companies, us. We've known each other for quite a few years, since the 90s, and I've always appreciated your pragmatic approach to economic issues, and I expect nothing less during this session. It is a pleasure to have you here this afternoon, and your expertise extends by far the matters of your chamber, so I would also like to pick your brain on related issues. So, enough of introductory matters, and let's get this party started. And maybe, as you suggested before we do the questions, you give a little overview like you suggested, and then we can take the questions afterwards.
Very good. Thank you, Niels. So once again, pleasure to be here. Indeed, Czech Chamber of Commerce is an institution which is not part of any governmental structures. It is an institution which exists according to a special law, which has been adopted back in 1993 to create Czech Chamber of Commerce and Czech Agrarian Commerce, Czech Agrarians Chamber. We do not have any single crown of money from the governmental budget. We finance ourselves. The membership in our chamber is not compulsory, obligatory. compared to the chambers in Germany or Austria, for instance. We have directly, as Neil said, about 16,000 members, indirectly because our members are also different professional associations. We cover about 25,000 companies, from the small ones till all the big ones, which are our members as well. Our membership base covers, and it's a very, very, I would say, fuzzy estimate, more or less about 70% of the annually produced GDP in this country. So this is what we are. We have a rather rich regional structure in every region and every district of Czech Republic. And in Prague, we have a kind of a representative office, which is chaired by the president, who is myself, and we have about 55 employees in the Prague office and about another 300 employees in different offices all over the country. For your information, as another proof we are not governmental, I am doing the position or the function of president of chamber free of charge. I'm not being paid for it. None of the elected officials are being paid. So that means, Niels, that you use the past tense, but in terms of Goldman Sachs, I am still advising to Goldman because I must have some kind of source of living. Now, very quickly to the economic situation. If I look at the situation just a year ago when the pandemic started, if you have told me how difficult the pandemics and how long the pandemics and how deep the pandemics, especially in the Czech Republic, will be, I would probably say that the economic impacts I would have expected at that time much worse than it turned out to be on the whole. Because if you take the Czech economy, which has fallen by some minus 5.6% in terms of the real growth last year, I expect around zero growth this year. But if you take the whole Czech economy, it's composed from three parts. There are a relatively small number of the companies who are enjoying a growth they didn't dream about a year ago in the IT sector and in many other sectors. Then there are the bulk of the industrial part, mainly industrial and manufacturing, which is, of course, doing worse than expected a year ago, but still are running to some extent. And then it's, of course, a relatively small part of the economy in the service sector, in the hospitality, and in many others. Unfortunately, they are mainly our members. So that's why I must be so vocal, and I am in a permanent conflict with the government. And this is, of course, the part of the economy which is suffering. I said that this year I expect zero growth. Central bank is more positive. They expect between 0 and 2% in real growth. We expect inflation to remain under control. Just yesterday's data on the current account deficits, we amassed a surplus in the first 2 months of 2021 and last year as well. So this is, of course, given also by the fall of imports. So our relations towards abroad are balanced, even in a slight surplus. And of course, we have amassed much stronger deficit. But again, compared to many European or Eurozone countries, our increase of deficit and indebtedness is by far not as bad as in some other countries. I expect that we will reach about 40% of debt to GDP ratio at the end of 2021. The unemployment is increasing only slowly thanks to the furlough schemes and other compensation programs of the government. And still the labor market is very tight, and there are structural disbalances in a sense that there are still the sectors of the economy that, despite increasing unemployment, still have problems to find appropriately qualified labor. So to make the long story short, oh yes, crown got moved a little bit, strengthened, and consequently again weakened vis-a-vis euro. There is a strengthening vis-a-vis dollar, which has to do more with the dollar situation than the crown. I don't expect any big volatility in the euro crown and dollar crown exchange rate. Last, the interest rates, I expect that the central bank will not hike basic rates during this year at all, maybe the first quarter of 2022, but again, this always depends on the particular development later this year. And of course, this all is interlinked with the fact to what extent there will be a continuation of period of the low interest rates all over the developed world, where I have my own hesitations, but this is probably not subject of today's discussion. So Niels, this is in a very nutshell, how do I, from the macroeconomic point of view, how do I see the Czech economy today? And I'm ready to your question.
Okay, you took a lot of my questions and air out of my balloon there, but that's good. Let's just start. What baffles me is that it's how little effect the lockdown since December has had on the number of new cases. Today or yesterday it was 14,000 or something again, and the numbers are extremely high compared to neighboring countries or comparable countries. And does the chamber have any survey on this or opinion on why it is like that? In Austria, it's, for instance, 1,500 a day, so in average.
Well, we don't have any survey on this, because this is a question which goes beyond the scope of Chamber of Commerce. That's basically issue for the Minister of Health, epidemiologists, etc. And I cannot do anything else than only to share common wisdom, which you all probably know. This has been linked to some premature opening before Christmas. And also at the end of summer last year, there is a lot of talk about the large indisciplines of the Czech population, and to some extent this might be true, but I don't think it's an important factor which would explain such a huge difference between, for instance, the new cases in Austria and in the Czech Republic. I am a member of some councils of the Minister of Health, how to deal with COVID-19, and Minister of Health, whoever was Minister of Health, because we had already three since the start of the pandemics, is explaining us that statistically we seem to be more open in testing and in publishing the results of the tests. I am not epidemiologist to be able to judge these basically statistical statement, but you must have epidemiological knowledge. But there might be a grain of truth as well. And that's it. I can explain it more. Only I have seen recently a sharp increase of new cases also in Germany. I know from talking to my Austrian colleagues that there are a huge regional difference in Austria. And for me, even bigger puzzle is I have a client in India. And India seems to be COVID-free. Well, probably is not entirely COVID-free, but definitely COVID does not present such a big problem as for Europe. And that's for me even a bigger puzzle. Why countries like India and others might have been better able to deal with COVID than the most developed countries on the earth like Europe and the United States.
Yeah, in India, social distancing is certainly more complicated than
definitely
our parts of the world. And the only answer I could have to that is that the population is a lot younger. And if you see the statistics, if you're under 55, there's almost zero chance of, or there's almost 0% fatalities connected to the COVID. And that sends me to my next question. Maybe we should just let people under 55 go out and work and do the testing and all this, and concentrate on and isolate the old and vulnerable high-risk groups. I don't know if that has been a discussion in the chamber, or if
Well, of course it was, but it is so difficult to judge and especially compare it with other countries. Now I see that there is an increased awareness among the general population over past two, three weeks. But maybe let's move ahead with the questions, because maybe we will come to some other facets of this problem.
Okay. So it's a question from one of our members. There was proposals to close production plants during or after Easter, and what was kind of the idea behind this? And it was a little bit of a shock to the system for everybody.
Yeah. Well, that also will give me an opportunity a little bit to continue in answering the previous question. But the first to the much stronger lockdown. Indeed, there is a very strong group of epidemiologists who months ago started to speak seriously about the lockdown of all the productions in the country in a companies with more than 50 employees. Which would also mean a virtual stop to even the smaller ones, because most of the smaller ones are delivering our suppliers to the larger ones. Sure. Not all of them, but many of them. So that would be indeed a very strong lockdown. This is a little bit mixed with the signs that government might close more around or lockdown more around the Easter. If this is the case, so it will be maybe the Thursday before Easter or Tuesday after Easter, so just to make the Easter recess to be a little bit longer. But that was not the issue. The issue was, and still is on the table of some people, to lock down the industrial product or all production in this country for 3 or 4 weeks. The idea behind that is otherwise we will not get out from the high numbers which we have today. This has been opposed by my chamber. This has been opposed by the Union of the Industry. And so far, government seems to be standing firm. The price which government offered is that the companies, all companies now even with less than 50 people employed, will compulsory test their employees at least once in a week with the antigenic AG test. And if an employee is positive by the AG test, he will immediately go to the PCR test, and also the small cluster of the people with which this employee has been in contact will have to go to the PCR test as well. This, by the way, increased immensely the number of tests in the country, and which by mere logic also is one of the explanations why we are still having a very high incidences of the new cases. And this is still the policy which is being kept by the government, which has a lot of additional issues, availability of the tests, financial cost, price of the particular test, etc., logistics. But at the same time, it is still better for all the parties involved than such a lockdown for 3-4 weeks I was speaking about. And coming back to, at this occasion, to your previous question. Basically, in the Czech Republic, there are two schools of thoughts today. The radical epidemiologist who wants to close the productions, which sometimes are being even supported by some of our members from the, let's say, retail sector, who were closed for already many weeks, and who foolishly believe that if you close the whole economy for 3-4 weeks, then miraculously everything is going to be open up. No, that's not true. It would never. So we are against that, and there is other school of thoughts, even among the epidemiologists, who say, well, this is the British mutation, which is passing through the country from the west to the east like a wave. We now see a slight improvement already in the western regions of the Czech Republic, and is moving through the country to the east. You can see it when you compare the incidences of COVID in different regions. And we can expect that over the next 2-3 weeks, the situation is going to improve substantially. So we must withhold next 2-3 weeks as it is and keep firm. And at the same time, there is a danger that these waves of different mutations might repeat. So only the way out is the as quick as possible vaccination of as big part of the population as possible. So this is the policy of the chamber. Of course, keep all the restrictions as much as possible. Test at least once in a week in all our companies, and stay open. Continue the production. Keep the unpleasant restrictions like that you cannot move among the districts. All the cultural and other events are closed. We must just be able to survive it, and to accelerate as much as possible the vaccination.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a host of government support measures, from early COVID-1, COVID-PRA, COVID-3, antivirus, gastro, COVID, self-employed contributions, and now it's a COVID-21 and COVID fixed costs contribution. What is the feeling of the members in your chamber as to what works? What did they appreciate? Which measure did they not like? And was it a little bit too little, too late, or what is the general feeling?
Especially among the members are here, you know, I can speak for the whole economy, because in now our work or our activities, we don't know distinguish whether the company is or is not our member. We try to be representative of all the economy, together with the union of industry. But the feeling among our members or among the entrepreneurs is, and let me put it diplomatically, mixed.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is what you have mentioned. We have probably too many different types of the supportive programs. It's a mess to some extent. It was, of course, from the very beginning, a goodwill on the side of the government. But starting the May, June last year, we as chamber, we wanted to repeat the experience from Austria and to some extent Germany, just to have the antivirus, the one which supports the people who normally would lose the job because of the imposed restrictions, which is basically kind of a derivative of what the Germans call Kurzarbeit, or what in English it's called the furlough schemes. Mm-hmm. And that probably should be in place. Maybe some support to the rental payments, because this is a special case. And for the rest, we preferred not to have all these different types of the supportive programs, COVID this, COVID that, to have one program which would have been based on the fall of a turnover of a particular company in, let's say, particular quarter of 2020 or now 21, vis-a-vis the same quarter or the last quarter of 2019. That would have, and if your turnover has fallen by 30 or 50%, you are entitled to get a compensation as a percentage of the fall of this turnover. This has been for a very long time refused by the government. Minister Havlicek kept telling me that also the Germans have had a negative experience, the Austrians had negative experience, because it opened the space for the free riders, that people were able to technically create a fall of turnover, etc., etc. But now, these two programs you have mentioned, the COVID 2021 and COVID fixed cost, they are already based. That was our big victory at the beginning of this year, that we forced the government to launch two programs which are based on the fall of a turnover. But then the compensation is not a percentage of the fall of the turnover. In COVID-21, it's based on the number of the employees. And in COVID fixed cost is based on the difference between the costs and the revenues, and when costs are higher than the revenues, then the compensation is a certain percentage of this difference. It's a kind of, I'm sorry to say so, bastardization of the original idea, but these two programs are the best what can be. Unfortunately, it comes too late, it is too little, and it's mixed with other programs, and we have a mess in the structure. When the biggest effort of our chamber now is to explain particularly people who are asking how can approach this program, that program, etc. So government spent some great deal of money. There is no doubt. The government had a goodwill, but I think they should have listened to the advices from outside the Czech Republic. And I'm sorry to say so, Niels, you know me, that I'm not so much proud that I never claimed that I knew everything better. But this time they could have listened to our request and to have one general compensation program already since summer last year.
I have the same feeling. And with the government, now they are introducing COVID 2021 and the fixed cost, and it doesn't seem that anybody know still for how long and for how much, and so it's always they seem to announce something first and they don't know what it entails. It was the same with they're offering 100% of the rent, and when the in the press or in the media, and when it came down to it, they said the 100% was 100% of what was before, which in essence was 50%. And it comes like this. The same is with the COVID programs for the state guarantees. They say the state guarantees 90% of the loan, but only 30% of the COVID-3 portfolio that the bank has. So in practice, it's only 30%, and it doesn't help very many. It just seems that they're just trying to look good in the media, and we all who are in need of these look like fools, or they just like, how stupid can we be to accept this, or the population?
Well, you are still better than me. Sometimes I'm hearing from my members, how, Mr. Dlouhý, you can be so stupid that you agreed with government on this. I used to be a member of the government for almost 8 years in difficult times of the 90s. So I had a certain weak spot for the government at the beginning, because this was indeed a situation which nobody of us was prepared for. So at the beginning, I had a sweet spot that it must have been hell of a difficult discussion, but they didn't listen. And this government, at least Mr. Babiš himself, he always was known for excellent PR. Since the beginning of the year, I have my doubts even about the good PR they have.
No, well, you also mentioned in your press conference yesterday about that the government must start speaking the truth even though it's an election year, and was this what you were referring to, or was
yes.
Was it something else? Okay.
Yes, this for instance, they should be able to say clearly, listen, people, given the numbers, we don't expect any opening before May, June this year. And thanks God if this is going to be May, June this year. And there are many other statements. And the other point is, you have already mentioned, some of the members of the government sometimes even rush to the media to announce the new type of a supportive measure, because they expect that it's going to bring them political points. And sometimes they are announcing measures which are only half cooked, are not properly discussed with the stakeholders like us and others, and that creates the uncertainty. So that was another reason why I mentioned what I have mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Also, you mentioned in your press conference yesterday that 100,000 self-employed are inactive, 30,000 closed shop, and as well as record numbers of bankruptcies. When all these antivirus and COVID-19 and all these programs stop, how do you expect these figures to move?
Yeah, one clarification: there was no record number of bankruptcies. There was a relatively large number of bankruptcy, given the fact that between April and I think November we had a moratorium that you could not have submit a request for insolvency to the court as another anti-pandemic measures. Despite that, we had a lot of bankruptcies. So frankly, I expect that now bankruptcies during the second quarter will increase, because we indeed see that among this relatively small part of economy which suffers, there indeed some entrepreneurs are on the brink of the collapse. But at the same time, listen, my disadvantage is that I represent these people, because generally Czech economy is not doing as bad. Unfortunately, the image of the country is now overshadowed by the mismanagement of the pandemics and high number of the new cases almost every day compared to our neighbors. That creates an image that Czech Republic is in a complete mess. Don't believe that. Economically, this country is not a mess, with the exception of those who really suffer. But then, and here I might maybe already forecast some of your future question, I expect a relatively quick recovery. But it will be Schumpeterian type of a creative destruction. Many of the companies, even which receive compensation, will not return to the market properly. And but there will be pent-up demand. I have different studies, both the Czech and outside, even from the bank I work for, which shows a huge increase of pent-up demand, increased savings of the population, and pent-up demand, especially in the service sector, in the travel sector, in the hospitality, etc., etc. Unless something really bad happens, it is expected that after the pandemics is going to slow down a little bit, there will be a huge increase of the demand, especially on those sectors which are now completely closed. Whether it will be in the automotive, I have my doubt. So industry will go slowly, but it will go as it goes now. The sector which today suffers might be witnessing, hopefully, increase of demand. I don't know whether this will be case for Kampa Park or whatever as well, or any other type of your restaurant, but I wish it was, or it would be.
Well, we've been more or less closed for a year, so
I know.
we are sitting on a barbed wire fence and bleeding slowly.
Yeah.
But we certainly hope that that the economy, or that everything will recover and be firing on all cylinders very soon. But we will see. For some companies, the labor laws are, especially entrepreneurs, you know, the labor law seems a bit inflexible. You have, for instance, a stock of 150 employees, and then you're hit by COVID, and you have to pay everybody 6 months to get rid of, to give people notice, and it's of course a very costly exercise. And in view of the new gig economy, where short-term work, and is the chamber doing any kind of planning or studies on how to resolve this situation in the future? Or?
Yes, we have a couple of thoughts, especially from the part of our members who represent the IT sector, ICT Union. But as you say now, the new type of the so-called gig economy, home officing, etc. That's probably something which will now, after the pandemic, pandemic disappears, which will probably spread to many other parts of the economy, and probably the way how business operates will never be as it was before pandemics, and the labor code and labor legislation should become more flexible. We have our thoughts about it already before the pandemics. We were fighting for the larger flexibility on the labor market, but to what extent a concrete proposal for the legislation change will be on the table, and here I'm sorry I don't have other answer. You must wait for the new government after the elections, because today the labor ministry, which always was kind of a very rigid structure, is even more rigid, given by the lady minister who who has a particular views of business and of the world. And it depends whether new parties who will form the government will be more open to the flexibility. And here I'm going to be straightforward. You see that according to the very last opinion polls, the Party of Pirates is foreseen together with the representatives of the municipality to be the winner of the elections. Party of Pirates on one side at least declares a very strong opening towards the new gig economy, the new ways of doing business, the new ways of organization of work, which would by implication say that they should be more open to the larger flexibility on the market. But at the same time, it has not a negligible part of a very left-wing thinking, very socially minded people who at the same time will like to keep a very strong social network and social support, even more than current minister. And here I don't see much delight at the end of the tunnel either. So of course everything depends who will govern this country after the elections. But on the other hand, if you compare it with the French, I wonder to what extent the famous rigidity on the French labor market is going to be adapted to the new gig economy.
Yeah, me too. We are in a bad place, that's for sure. I have some two questions here from one of our members, and it's not from me, even though it could have been. Has the chamber taken any measures to help to re-qualify employees away from tourism, like industries like tourism and hospitality and culture, or because that is somewhat the way things are going now?
Well, we do as a chamber, as an institution itself, we do not have capacity ourselves to organize on a more massive scale the requalifications. But we try to support, and that's more question to our regional chapters in different regions of the Czech Republic. We try to organize it. We try to work together with the labor offices in different regions, and we try to organize at least logistically. We don't have the financing for it. We don't have an organizational capacity, but in cooperation with the labor offices, we try to support it. We also created already in the summer kind of a digital platform which would allow matchmaking between the supply of labor and the demand of labor, also via some type of the requalification. So we try to the extent to what our capacities and our financial means allow.
Another question from one of our members is that there are a lot of, you have partly answered this before, but just to do my duty as the representative, I will phrase it to you. There are still companies that are operating maybe on 50% of capacity or less. And is there any special programs that you are pushing for these companies? The people who are closed, there's antivirus, but for those who are just operating just at under break even, if you understand my question.
Well, yes, I do. But that was the main reason why we have been pushing something which now at the end turned out to be the program COVID fixed costs, because then the difference between the higher cost than the revenues is a basis for the compensation. The problem this time is also on the side of the finance minister, which became to be very rigid recently in terms of being prepared for allowing a larger financial support to this type of compensation program, given the same deficit that last year on the horizon for this year. For instance, we wanted to have a fixed cost program based on the fact that everybody whose turnover compared to the same period of 2019 has fallen by more than 30% is already eligible for the compensation. Unfortunately, Ministry of Finance insisted on the 50% fall of turnover. Yeah, and there were a couple of other things that we lost because we didn't get a support neither from the prime minister. It was more Minister Havlicek who was on our side, but his position in the government, it's not strong. I must also say that we begin to fight also with the division within the society. I don't know to what extent this is true in some of your Nordic countries, because there is a part, there are the entrepreneurs or those entrepreneurs who suffer, but there is a huge part of the society, especially the seniors, retired people, but some employees and even some students, left-leaning students, who believe that all the suffering of entrepreneurs is a kind of bubble which has been created purposely by ourselves to dig out from the government as much money as possible. And this is something, unfortunately, also the attitude of the finance ministry. That's why we made a very precise calculation how much out of the 376 billion crowns of deficit in the year 2020, how much did go for the direct support to the business, because it was believed in the society that most of this deficit went to the entrepreneurs, and that's not true. Directly only 27 billion, indirectly by either abolishing or postponing the tax and other contributions, it was 87 billion. So in total, the direct help was around 110 billion crowns out of 376 billion deficit.
Yeah, that doesn't seem so much.
No.
What do you think we learned from this pandemic? Is it how can we be prepared for next time?
You are younger, Niels. I'm approaching 70, and I want to retire and to have peace after all this. But if I put this personal feeling aside, and visit time to time your restaurants or some other, if I put this aside, I believe that this is a signal to all developed world that we couldn't have continued our way of life as before, including the massive traveling. You know that I never was in particular green. So, but that's also a raised finger vis-a-vis reasonable green policies. And again, there are reasonable green policies, and then there are European green policies. This probably also has to do to learn that we should be able to abandon our habits. This has to do with the new organization of labor, gig economy, increased role of the home offices. It has to do with the idea that the education will be lifetime. The fact that you complete study something and you do the same profession all your life, forget about it in most of the professions. And on the other hand, I am an old center-right conservative economist who believe that capitalism will not become a victim of these pandemics.
No, let's hope so. Well, the pandemic will probably exceed 500 billion at the end of the day, and somebody has to pick up that bill. Do you think that the economic growth will manage to pay for this, or will it be increased taxes, and which taxpayers will have to come to the table?
Well, of course, this is a very difficult question. Let me start with the British example from the end of Second World War. If you look at the British debt at the end of in 1945-46, you would have thought that they would never have been able to get out from the debt trap. Then came the miraculous 50s and 60s, and it was done. The same was true for many other countries in Europe and elsewhere in different periods. So the basic answer is, if after this pandemic, which is also a crisis, and after every crisis comes the reconstruction, and if we will be able to launch a long-term massive growth, we will grow out of the debt. But I'm afraid that given the many rigidities, especially in the European economy, labor rigidities, social rigidities, political rigidities, decision-making, bureaucracy, administration, inflexible commission, that this will not be the case for Europe. So Europe must hope that the period of low interest rates will last very, very long time. The majority of economists believe that this will be the case, but they are already economists, albeit still a minority, who begins to raise the finger, and they believe that in relatively few years, the basic rates elsewhere will increase substantially. They base this claim on not on the pandemic problems, but on the problems with the aging of the society and the inadequate pension systems. And that if this is the case relatively soon, that many countries who now increase their indebtedness because of the pandemics will be on the verge of bankruptcy. Czech Republic, fortunately, belongs to those who started with a relatively very low debt to GDP ratio a year ago, 30%. We have increased it. And so I don't think that even if we face the increase of interest rates, that we would be on the face of bankruptcy. But in any case, the new government should first of all adopt a policy of debt reconciliation, phased out probably to the period of 5 years. And it remains to be seen whether the growth will be enough to generate money to consolidate the debt, or whether there will be a need of increased taxes. If increased taxes, then I believe that it's going to be rather indirect than direct taxes that will be subject to the increase.
Well, we will see. We will see. There is a lot of talk about supply chain, and that obviously gives a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs and Czech companies as we're heading in a direction of getting more independent from China and Far East. And does the chamber or have some programs to propose to the government on how people can take part in this, or companies can prepare for this shift in the supply chain?
Well, as I have already mentioned, the current president of Czech Chamber of Commerce is an old conservative personality who strongly believes in an open liberal trade based on the Bretton Woods system as it has been established after Second World War. So I am not a big supporter about protectionism, closing the markets, cutting off the supply chains, etc. Every shortening of the supply chain means increasing the price of the final product in the final country, which means pressure on the standard of living of the people there. Of course, this is counterbalanced by a loss of jobs when you allow most of the production to move to places like China, etc. That's why we have an American crisis, and that's why we had Mr. Trump in the US.
But also know-how is going away, and
know-how is going away, etc. So probably because the people like myself over next decade will be intellectually wiped out. I'm in an especially difficult mood just today. Because we are going to be wiped out over next decade. I hope that the final solution will be some kind of a balancing act between keeping the markets and the countries as open as possible, and at the same time taking into account the needs for the keeping the intellectual property at home, also lowering the environmental damage impact of too much long supply chains and need for transportation all across the globe, etc., etc. So the future, the people who are going to manage our economies in the future will be able to carefully balance the need of what we are speaking about and what I believe is the essence of the capitalist economy. This is the open and liberal trade. Also, we have now the new leadership of the WTO, World Trade Organization, and it will be extremely important how this lady is going to manage the WTO.
Okay. As we see the progress of things, the tests and other measures are not going to stop this immediately. So the only savior, as you mentioned earlier, is the vaccine. And as we see now, there is more and more companies that are getting its vaccine approved, and there was a little hiccup with AstraZeneca last week. It seems to be that the blood clots are not their fault anyway, and that would have taken a couple of billion vaccinations off the market. And how do you see the progress of the Czech Republic and the companies? How would the companies try to make vaccinations on their own and go by the queues, or what is your opinion on how this will pan out?
And we have a president who desperately wants to give us jabs with Sputnik or Chinese vaccine. Listen, the view of the companies is those who can afford it, those who are not hit by the pandemics, those who are financially in a relatively good shape. Many of them would be ready even to buy on their own vaccines and vaccinating their people. They say they have no even logistics at hand. Well, of course, because more and more people are now believing that what I have described is the most proper scenario: vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. On the other hand, I'm very critical how European Commission handled the vaccination. But putting this aside, there is no doubt that the purchase and distribution vaccination cannot be done by anybody else than the state. So I don't expect, and as a matter of fact, I don't wish that companies themselves should be able to purchase the vaccines, because vaccines must be, particular type of vaccine must be approved by a EMA, the European agency, and our SÚKL, the Czech agency. Yeah. What now is in the air is not only the willingness of companies to vaccinate. There are many who call us almost every day. As a matter of fact, yesterday I sent to Prime Minister Babiš a letter, or this morning, saying that the chamber offers its network for not for purchasing, but for distributing the vaccines and ensuring the logistics for the vaccination. But then the question is whether the companies or the people themselves, will be ready to vaccinate themselves at all, because you will always find some people who will blatantly refuse to be vaccinated. That's the first problem. Hopefully there will not be very many. And second, they are companies and people who are saying, if a certain vaccine, disregarding whether this is Sputnik or Chinese, if it is being approved by the Czech authority, which is the authority which has abbreviation SÚKL, SUKL, Státní úřad pro kontrolu léčiv. If a vaccine has this certification, we are ready to use it, and we don't look whether this has a European certification or Chinese or Russian production or whatever. And again, there are companies who are ready to say, there are companies who are not ready to say it. There are people who are ready to accept Sputnik, and there are people who say never. So even people are divided. But here I believe that at the end of the day, if there is enough vaccines of every type of origin, it will be possible to vaccinate the country rather quickly. But we must have them.
Absolutely. And as the clock is running away from us and we only got a couple of minutes, I will ask you a last question. When, in your opinion, do you think we will all be traveling again and going to restaurants in a normal way and enjoying the outdoors and sports like we used to. And the economy will again be firing on all 12 cylinders.
On 4 cylinders out of 12, let's say 12 is maximum. On 4 cylinders, I have some hope for summer. On the 12th cylinder, I believe that we are going to follow the example of a Spanish flu exactly a century ago, which lasted exactly 2 years. So on the 12 cylinders, only spring 2022.
It's a long time to wait. Not very promising prediction.
But listen, if I'm wrong, I would be the most happy man on the earth.
I know that. I know you for so long, so I know that you would be a very happy person when this disappears. On that note, Vladimir, I thank you a million. And the next time I see you, I will bring a case so I can fill up that storage on the.
But don't be afraid, it's almost full.
Okay, so I come and empty it for you again.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you for taking your time. It was a great pleasure, and you give great insight into the works of the chamber and your views on the economy. And we are very privileged to having had the chance to talk to you today. Thank you, Vladimir. And,
thank you, Niels, for inviting me, and let me wish to you and all to your colleagues who were on today, well, that they will be able to manage this pandemic as good as possible. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.